You're listening to Home Sweet Home with Russ, McClellan, and friends. And here's Russ.
Hey, how's everybody doing in the land of COVID? Thanks for tuning in one more time to the Russ McClellan adventure. I think I have a podcast or a YouTube channel now. It's called Russ's Radical Realty. I'm not sure where I came up with that, but it sounds radical right now is a good word. It's a good word to be used for our show and for this last year, 2020. And I can't believe it's February. Not sure how we got to February, but I was doing some reflecting, and it was interesting because I've been in the real estate business 30 plus years. And I want to just say publicly, thank you to every realtor in the association and member, frankly, because we have more than just realtors, appraisers, some builders, etc. And the North Central Washington Association of Realtors, I was inducted into the Hall of Fame 2020 class, which is about one person a year. And, you know, over 30 years, you take a lot of classes, you do a lot of things, you get, some accreditations here and there. And that one was a pretty big one for me. Most of the time I just fly fast and, I'm not too worried about accolades, but that one was, I'm greatly appreciative of that because I think, if nothing else, what it says to me is, I'll tell you, everybody that knows me well enough knows I've been up, I've been down, I've been up, I've been down, I've had issues, I've been divorced, I've been bankrupt. I mean, I'm one of those people and I've been a millionaire a couple times. So what's kind of weird about that is that it's just life. It's a 30-year life of real estate and selling my hometown, sharing my hometown, and now we're fortunate enough at Keller Williams to be all over the place in North Central Washington with 73 real estate brokers and counting. Anyway, I just want to say thank you to everybody. That was a big deal to me. And it kind of is a good segue to what I want to talk about on today's show. Everybody that I know is talking about predictions. Where are we going to end up in 2021? And specifically because real estate's the game that I tend to play. I thought I'd talk about where we once were as a community and why, and maybe where we're at with some of the economic forces that are happening in our market, and maybe where are we going to go? And that's the big one, right? What's going to happen in 2021 and beyond? So many, it's kind of an overused word, but so many people are saying the word unprecedented right now. It's unprecedented that many people are saying that. So here's the thing. I just thought I'd take my hometown, and I think my hometown in Lake Chelan, I actually grew up in Manson. I graduated in 1987. My mom in 1956, my dad in 1952, and my grandmother came on a covered wagon from Missouri to Manson, Washington when she was about 7 years old, and she lived to be 101. So I've been there a while. I joke around, and I've said it on this show before, I'm only fourth generation. I'm not quite a local. My kids have a shot at the title. They're fifth generation, and now they're 28 and 23. So here's the thing. I want to talk about the past and how it relates to real estate. Where were we when my dad was in high school? When he graduated high school in the 1950s, 1952 to be specific. There's a couple funny things about that. Like he helped build the football field at the school in 1952. Before that, they played football down at Wapato Point, which is down along the shores of Manson, right on Lake Chelan. So just some very funny things about that you wouldn't think is a big deal. But most of the people that were in that time frame in Manson's history in the Lake Chelan Valley, and quite frankly, everywhere in North Central Washington, primarily were farmers. And farmers are funny people in a way. I consider myself a farmer. In a way, I grew up on a 10-acre apple orchard. I've owned apple orchards and pear orchards. I farmed with my best friend, my father, who passed away in April. We worked together in the farming business since I was a little kid. In fact, he finally, I think when I was about 12 or 13, told me to get out of the orchard because I was too expensive. And didn't quite thin apples correctly, didn't quite prune correctly. And he worked his butt off, 16, 18 hours a day. And that's just the way everybody did it. So it wasn't a big deal. My mom got up at 4 a.m. and then worked a full-time job at what once was called Sea First Bank for 25 years in Chelan. I mean, so, the work ethic was obviously by the people of that generation. extreme. But it was a good life. It was a great life, as a matter of fact. And what was funny about it, the time, even when I was in high school, which I think was kind of the end of the small farming era, where the vast majority of people were small farmers, and that made for good rivalries. Because a lot of the small schools, whether it be Pateros or Brewster or Bridgeport or Omak or Chelan or Manson, I mean, we had different leagues at times, but we were all sometimes second generational rivalries, right? Our dads played football against each other, etc. So it was fun growing up. And the funny thing about our founding fathers, so to speak, of our town being farmers and self-employed people, it was the American dream, kind of, right? You could own your own business and make money. Maybe you didn't get rich, but if you lived conservatively and you worked hard, you could make some money and provide a good life for your family. Well, that also, with farmers, came an independence, right? They were very proud, very independent. In fact, I kind of joke around when I talk sometimes, when I think of the past, and I think, wow, in the apple business, we literally had sheds, warehouses that competed against each other across the street from one another. Like I'll take Trout and Blue Chelan, for those that can remember. Two big warehouses in our area, and they were almost side by side, adjacent. And yet they were competing against each other. So some people were Trout people, some people were Blue Chelan people. And now it's kind of merged. And what's interesting about that time frame is a lot of people don't realize, but the supply and demand curve, or economics 101, supply and demand, is what runs almost all pricing. I mean, there's other factors, of course, but it really boils down to the simple equation: supply and demand. And once upon a time, that was pretty equal in the farming business. Well, then one day, I think it was around 2008, if I remember right, or excuse me, 1998. And don't quote me, I'm just a radio host, right? But somewhere in the late 90s, things started to change, and the consolidation on the buying side happened. So instead of having the equal number of warehouses to sell fruit and the equal number of buyers, or close, all of a sudden the buyers consolidated. And you have the Krogers of the world, you have the Walmarts of the world, and they kind of started running the show, and the farmers were independent. They kept competing against each other. So it kind of created an auction, and that really started to drive down price, because they started demanding on the buying side more and more and more for less and less and less. And what are you going to do if the buyers, if you go from 300 buyers to 6, nationwide? And then there was NAFTA and other things. And I don't want to go too deep into that. I just want to say that there was a time where all of a sudden farmers had to sell, where prior to that time, most farmers sold their land to other farmers. And in fact, if you listed a farm, it was an apple orchard, it was probably not a very good one if you listed it with a real estate broker back then. The coffee shop was usually the best place to sell, or maybe call your warehouse and they'd ask somebody that asked somebody, or a banker or something. And then all of a sudden the market kind of got flooded with acreage. And, in some ways that was really a bad time. A lot of farmers went under. There was a lot of problems that came with that, but fortunately, in a bad situation back then, the idea of vineyards came into play, and in large part thanks to the commissioners at the time. The Chelan County commissioners, they worked hard at what was called the Ag Tourism Ordinance, or on-farm, non-farm income, which basically meant, I could turn a wrench in my orchard, and even though it wasn't necessarily zoned for commercial, there was an opportunity now to do some things commercial, which ended up propagating itself, so to speak, into where now we have tasting rooms, right? So we kind of went from this idea that if we're going to go broke, we got to give farmers a way to make some extra money. That led to restaurants, led to basically these tasting rooms and more vineyards. So now we have, I don't know what it is, 40 or 50 wineries in the Lake Chelan Valley. So that was kind of just a brief history of like what happened when I was in school. And then from there, but there were some pretty interesting things. Back then the technology was just coming into play, but for years there was no cell phones. I mean, I remember selling real estate when I started in '89. I had a beeper, and we'd all, buy a map at a gas station and then go find a telephone booth to call the seller to see where the heck I was, right? I mean, so therefore, the idea that somebody would be able to live in our area and make a living was challenging, because other than farming, there's other things, but technology just was not part of the equation at all. And you go back long enough, the hydroelectric dam that's there was built in the 50s. I mean, before that, there was dams, but like at the end of Lake Chelan and in the Columbia, but they were a lot different, right? So I'm just trying to paint a picture in this first segment. We got 4 segments on this show, and hopefully you're enjoying this little history lesson of bits and bytes, because I want to just set that tone for what's happening now. And I think in the next couple segments, we'll kind of go from where we once were, as I described, to where we're at maybe now. And in that third segment, maybe we'll talk about what might happen next. So when we come back, I'm excited. Lake Chelan's my hometown. Unprecedented change. I'm excited to talk about it. I'm excited to share my thoughts. And like Yogi Berra said, remember this: predicting things is very, very difficult, especially about the future. Nobody knows for sure. I'll be right back with Home Sweet Home and Russ McClellan. Thanks for tuning in. Talk to you in just a few seconds.
Home sweet home, oh home sweet home, home sweet home.